As the Ukraine war drags closer to the end of its fourth year, Russia would have been hoping that Ukraine's allies would have grown tired. By now, they would give up on the country. Surely Ukraine would be seen as a lost cause. A nation that has become a time and money sink, that the allies can no longer afford to support. That hasn't happened, if anything. Ukraine's European partners are helping the country more than ever, especially when it comes to supporting Ukraine and developing the weapons it needs to defeat Russia. And Germany just came through massively. With one move, Germany just crushed Vladimir Putin's war plans by promising to help Ukraine with the one thing that Ukraine really needs more: long-range weapons. That's according to the Kyiv Post, which reported on comments made by German during a November 19th press conference Merz held with the Swedish Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, in Berlin. Together, the two covered how Germany and Sweden are going to cooperate in the future. However, the true headlines were made when Merz switched focus from that cooperation to how Germany is going to help Ukraine with its long-range strikes in the future. Merz revealed that Germany has been cooperating with Ukraine over the course of the last several months on what the German Chancellor calls long-range fire, adding, "We are doing everything that we can to equip the Ukrainian army." However, Merz wouldn't go into more detail than that, preferring to keep what Germany is doing or providing for Ukraine confidential. He did explain why he wouldn't provide more details, stating, "We have agreed that we will no longer talk publicly about details." Merz added that Germany and Ukraine want to maintain a certain degree of ambiguity toward the Russian side. That makes sense. The less Russia knows about what Germany and Ukraine are doing, the less it's able to prepare for the long-range strikes to come. Metz was far more vocal about the other ways that Germany is trying to support Ukraine, especially when it comes to helping the country and repair the energy infrastructure. Russia has spent the last few months battling long-range strikes of its own. Russia is ruthlessly and deliberately attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Merz told reporters Germany recently contributed $60 million to the Ukraine Energy Support Fund, increasing it to a total of $450 million to support energy supplies in Ukraine. Throughout the winter, he added, and Metz isn't wrong, raising the Ukraine Energy Support Fund to €450 million, or around $518 million, will hopefully go somewhere toward restoring infrastructure that is crumbling under Russian strikes. The Kyiv Independent notes Russia's strikes have already destroyed nearly 70% of Ukraine's electricity generating capacity, and Putin will hope to raise that number before winter sets in. Any money that Germany can provide in that arena will help Ukraine get through what promises to be a difficult winter. Merkel also made sure to highlight Germany is providing military aid in other ways. "We intend to increase our financial support for the Ukrainian military by a further $3 billion next year. We are doing this not only to help Ukraine, but also in our own security interest," Math said during the press conference. This isn't recent news. On November 4th, Reuters reported that Germany planned to boost the aid it sends to Ukraine by that amount. In 2026, that extra aid adds to the €8.5 billion Germany had already earmarked for Ukraine, creating a total of €11.5 billion, or a little over $13.2 billion. Matt may not have revealed anything new with this statement, but making the military aid statement so publicly confirms that this extra money will be going to Ukraine. On one condition, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has to do more to tackle corruption in the Ukrainian camp in return. "We expect Ukraine to remain a dependable and reliable partner. This means that a relentless crackdown on corruption in Ukraine is absolutely essential," Meyer said almost outright, stating that Ukraine has to stay on the straight and narrow to continue receiving the level of European Union membership. There is a good reason why. Merz added this caveat to his speech, as Ukraine has been embroiled in corruption controversy over the last couple of months. The Guardian published a report on November 19th covering the basics. It says that Ukraine's corruption scandal started when a group of insiders was revealed to have received kickbacks of up to 15% from Ukraine's nuclear energy company Energoatom. That company runs 3 nuclear plants in Ukraine that are responsible for generating about half of the country's electricity. Around $100 million was spent on these kickbacks, per investigations into the affair, and the whole thing smacks of the sort of corruption that is so often seen in the Russian industry. Making things even worse is that the organizer of the scheme is a man named who is an old friend and business partner of Zelensky's, so Ukraine's president is tied to the corruption case, even if he isn't involved directly. Merz is letting Zelensky know that he and Ukraine have to do better if they're going to continue receiving aid. That message has likely been taken on board by a clearly embarrassed Zelensky, and his blushes will have been spared by the fact that Germany has gone beyond all of its detailed mentions of upcoming aid to also discuss how the country is helping Ukraine with its long-range operations. An obvious question has to be asked: does this mean Taurus missiles are finally coming to Ukraine? Some would argue that they should be, and it would certainly have been a massive announcement by Germany to state that they are. Merz himself was very vocal about Germany's reluctance to send one of its premier cruise missiles to Ukraine when he was on the campaign trail for the German chancellorship. In December 2024, the Ukrainian World Congress even reported that Merz had promised to deliver Taurus missiles to Ukraine if he were elected German chancellor. President Zelensky is aware of our position on the Taurus missiles. As of now, in early December 2024, it remains unchanged, Merz said when speaking about Taurus missiles last year. He added, "Our position is clear, as is that of our parliamentary faction. We want your army to be able to strike military bases in Russia, not civilian targets, not infrastructure but military sites from which your country is being attacked." Merz managed to win the chancellorship, but Taurus missiles are still nowhere to be found. In Ukraine, Merz hasn't revealed anything regarding the future of the Taurus in the context of the Ukraine war, and his press conference comments didn't shed any further light on the situation. All we have on Mercedes claims that Germany is working with Ukraine on the latter's long-range capabilities, and it seems safe to assume that the Taurus isn't part of that work. If it were, we would know about it by now, as Ukraine would almost certainly have used Taurus almost as soon as it had its hands on the cruise missile. So we come to another question. If not Taurus, then what? Defense Express asked that very same question in its November 20th article, where it covered the comments that Merz made during his press conference. It also added another small but very important quote from Merz. The German chancellor said that if necessary, the production of such weapon systems in Ukraine is possible when talking about the long-range systems Germany is working on to provide to Ukraine. That detail is important as it tells us two things. First, whatever long-range system Merz is referring to must either be available in Germany or manufactured outright in the country. If Merz were referring to any of the long-range missiles that Ukraine is making domestically, he wouldn't have clarified that building. Whatever weapons Germany is providing is possible in Ukraine, of course. It would be possible, it would already be happening. Second, Merz's statement implies that Germany knows how to build whatever long-range weapons that are under discussion with Ukraine. If it didn't, Merz wouldn't be able to talk about the possibility of those weapons being made in Ukraine, because he would understand that Germany doesn't know how to build those weapons. And if Germany doesn't know how, then it can't show Ukraine. These two takeaways from a single quote allow us to speculate on what weapons Merz is talking about when it comes to the one thing that he has Germany promised is doing to help Ukraine topple Russia. As Defense Express notes, an examination of Germany's missile and drone stocks allows us to come up with some possibilities, assuming the Taurus isn't on its way to Ukraine. Let's start with the types of weapons that can be eliminated from contention. Ballistic missiles are immediately out of the running. As Defense Express explains, it's possible to immediately exclude any ballistic missiles due to their absence in Germany itself. And in fact, they are not present in any of the European countries, except for the intercontinental ones in France, the outlet reports. That leaves the cruise missile category, within which Germany operates several types of weapons and drones. We can also take some of Germany's cruise missiles out of the running. The country uses Storm Shadow or Scalp missiles, which Ukraine has been using for much of its fight against Russia. More of these types of missiles would certainly be welcome additions to Ukraine's stockpiles, as their range can vary between 140 and 550 kilometers, or 86.9 and 341 miles. That opens up options for Ukraine to strike hardened targets in the Russian border regions, the Black Sea and Crimea, all of which it's targeted with Storm Shadow missiles before. However, Germany has a very indirect relationship to the production of these missiles, which are made in France and the UK. If Merz's comments about Ukraine being able to build the long-range weapons to which he refers is true, that means Storm Shadow is out, because Germany can't show Ukraine how to build this weapon. The same goes for MDCN missiles it currently enjoys from Germany. I've already told the president this twice, once in person, and again in a telephone conversation in recent days. All of this remains a prerequisite for further progress. Germany has access to those missiles, Defense Express explains, and Ukraine would love to have that access too. As MBDA Systems, which manufactures the missile, points out, MDCN is designed to be a deep strike weapon that has exceptional range and hits targets hard. Odin notes that the missile's range is somewhere in the ballpark of 1,000 kilometers, or 621 miles. That would open up even more long-range targets for Ukraine. However, there are two barriers in the way of this missile, being the one to which Merz is referring. First, as with Scalp, MDCN is made in France, so Germany doesn't have the production knowledge needed to make domestic production of the missile in Ukraine a possibility. Second, and perhaps more importantly, MDCN is a ship and submarine-launched missile that makes it almost worthless to Ukraine, given the country's lack of a real navy that covers the long-range weapons, to which Merz can't be referring. But what about the actual possibilities? There are 3 long-range weapons in the German arsenal, besides Taurus, that align with the vague comments that Merz delivered in his press conference, and all 3 would make for good additions to Ukraine's growing long-range arsenal. The one-way effector is one of those weapons. referred to as Europe's jet-powered Shahid, with a 155mm shell inside by Defense Express. In June, the one-way effector is another MBDA production. As the Shahid comparisons imply, this weapon is a long-range drone designed to enable low-cost and scalable production. That is right inside Ukraine's wheelhouse, especially as it's switching more toward buying weapons or building them itself. MBDA itself, said the weapon, has a potential production capacity of 1,000 units per month, and that number could rise even higher if Ukraine commits its considerable drone building resources to the one-way effector. With Germany's help, if that decision is made, Ukraine will be getting a jam-resistant drone that weighs around 100 kilograms, or about 220 pounds, and can be loaded with a 155mm artillery shell. That implies the drone can carry a warhead that accounts for almost half of its total weight, which should do a fair amount of damage. The maximum range of 500 kilometers or 310 miles puts it in the same range category as some of the more advanced versions of Storm Shadow. Plus, the drone can fly at speeds of up to 400 kilometers or almost 250 miles per hour. Combine that with low-altitude flight and you get a nightmare for Russia's air defenses. But hold on a second, savvy viewers will have noticed that the drone's manufacturer is MBDA, which is the same company that builds the MDCN missiles we just said were out of the running. That's true, however. The one-way effector is meant to be a drone that all European countries can build, which opens the door for Ukraine. However, there is one thing holding this drone back. Full production isn't slated to start until 2027. That implies that design work on the one-way effector isn't finished yet, which also means that it's unlikely that Ukraine will be building it domestically anytime soon, so we can file this drone in the possible but improbable category when it comes to the long-range weapon to which Merz referred next. On the list of potential candidates is the crossbow cruise missile. Another MBDA product, this cruise missile offers a range of up to 800 kilometers or around 497 miles, which makes it instantly desirable for Ukraine. Having a missile that can strike beyond the border regions could allow the country to do far more permanent damage to Russia's oil refineries, according to Army recognition. The production of this cruise missile is supposed to start at scale in 2026, and it will be capable of delivering payloads weighing up to 300 kilograms, or about 661 pounds. That makes the missile one of the heaviest hitters that we've covered so far, and it's also a weapon that Ukraine will be able to get its hands on relatively soon given MD's production schedule. Though Germany once again isn't spearheading the development of this weapon, the prospect of a technology transfer is quite high. Defense Express says combine that with the promise to start delivering the missiles in 2026, and you get a strong contender for the long-range system. Metz alludes to, however, there is one more contender, and this one ticks all the boxes. From potentially being very useful to Ukraine to being a weapon that Germany might be able to help Ukraine build on its own territory. That weapon is the Barracuda 500M cruise missile. Or more accurately, a version of that missile that Rheinmetall plans to develop, possibly in collaboration with the missile's original designer. Angel, we don't know what changes Rheinmetall might make to the original design, however. Angel says the Barracuda is available in 3 flavors: 100, 250, and 500. Those numbers refer to the weight in pounds of the warhead that each version of the missile can carry. If the Barracuda 500M is on the agenda, that means Ukraine is getting a missile that packs a punch and has impressive range. The missile has a 575-mile range and can loiter for up to 120 minutes while preparing to zero in on a target. It's also easy to build, requiring 50% less manufacturing time than other cruise missiles on the market, and is around 30% cheaper than the average cruise missile, of course. This all comes from Andrew Reel's marketing department, but the specifications make it sound like a missile that's right up Ukraine's alley. As for why the Barracuda variant, on which Rheinmetall is working, is the top contender of the weapons we've covered in this video, there's a simple reason. That reason is Rheinmetall itself. On October 26, 2024, United 24, media reported that Rheinmetall had announced plans to establish 4 defense factories in Ukraine. That initiative is being conducted alongside Ukraine's defense industry, with Rheinmetall owning a 51% share in the factories being built. The idea is to bring facilities capable of building NATO standard and NATO-compatible weapons to Ukraine. Integrate Ukraine into the NATO defense framework. Now think back to the 2 takeaways we extracted from Metz's comment about the long-range system which Germany and Ukraine are collaborating. First, the system has to be made in Germany. The Barracuda 500mm fits the bill, whether it comes from Rheinmetall or Angel Air. Second, the weapon has to be at least possible to manufacture in Ukraine, with 4 Rheinmetall-owned factories being built in Ukraine as we speak. Base is covered still. It's all speculation. Merz hasn't revealed which long-range system he meant, and it doesn't seem likely that he will. But if Taurus is still off the table, despite Merz's campaign promises, then the Barracuda looks like the next safest bet. Whatever the weapon ends up being, the fact that Germany is supporting Ukraine and improving its long-range strike capability is massive. By March of 2025, Ukraine has intensified its long-range campaign against Russian oil, with a strategy that sees it attempt to weaken Russia on the front lines by harming it deeper in the rear. That strategy has now become essential for Ukraine. Writing for the New York Times in October, Andrew E. Kramer pointed out that Ukraine is using these strikes to batter Russian military targets on the country's own soil, all with the goal of bringing Putin back to the negotiating table. Now long-range strikes aim to force Russia into a settlement by inflicting damage on its already strained economy and by spurring a largely pacified Russian public to begin to agitate against the war. Kramer wrote another new, long-range weapon being added to Ukraine's arsenal would help it take a step closer toward that goal. And if Merz is to be believed, Germany has been helping Ukraine in that department for several months. Ukraine has also demonstrated just how effectively it can use Western-made long-range missiles. Earlier in October, after laboring under a shadow ban that has seemed to last since Donald Trump became U.S. president, Ukraine has finally unleashed ATACMS missiles against Russia once again. Those missiles allowed Ukraine to conduct a brutal revenge strike for a Russian attack on Kyiv, and you can learn why that strike is so important in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of Germany's latest moves in support of Ukraine. And thank you as always for watching.